Hey everybody, I'm Aaron Porras, and thank you for joining us for ILTV's weekly program, One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. This is the program where we want to give you, our viewers, the chance to have your questions answered by Professor Dershowitz, one of America's greatest legal minds. He's a leading expert on criminal and constitutional law, civil liberties, and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Professor Dershowitz, it's a pleasure to have you back with us. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.
All right, now our guest in the studio today is Major General Reserve Dr. Jung Tov Samiha, who served as commander of Israel's Southern Command, and he's also considered one of Israel's leading experts on security affairs, particularly regarding Gaza and the Palestinian issue, as well as on Syria and Lebanon, where he has served extensively. Now, for our first topic, red alert sirens in Israel's south have sounded 166 times in just the past 22 hours due to wave after wave of rockets being launched from the Gaza Strip. The events are still unfolding, but most suspect that the tit-for-tat won't go on for much longer before exploding. So, General Samiha, first of all, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me here. Thank you, Professor Dershowitz, for inviting me to this great program of you.
So, all right, so why don't you start us off? What's your take on the current conflict in Gaza and how Israel should be responding to it?
Looking into the situation in the past 10 years or 11 years since we disengaged from the Gaza Strip, or particularly on the last 10 years when the Hamas took control on the Gaza Strip by violence way, my main complaint to my government is that looks like we don't have a long-term strategic policy with the Palestinian issue in general, with the Gaza issue in particular, and more particular with the Hamas, who is a terror organization who control the Gaza Strip. So when you don't have real strategic for long term, you find yourself every 3-4 years doing something which always starts from a higher point than you finish your previous round. So if we can accumulate all our efforts in the last 3 operations of 2008, 2010, and 2014 into one operation, which should take place in my opinion in 2010 or 9 or 8, to vanish Hamas from the Gaza Strip and hand back the control on the Gaza Strip to Palestinian Authority, because all of us knows very well there will not be any progress or solution with the Palestinian Authority or the Palestinian issue without vanishing the Hamas from the Gaza Strip.
Professor, yeah.
So my question is this. We didn't do that. Israel didn't do that. Can it do that now, or must it respond constantly to this dead baby strategy that Hamas has perfected, whereby it forces Israel into a situation every several years where Israel has to kill civilians inadvertently in an effort to protect its own citizens? Obviously, that hasn't worked for Israel. It's protected its citizens, but it has caused tremendous public reaction against Israel. So putting aside the issue of what Israel should have done 10 years ago or 8 years ago, what can Israel do now to change the reality and put the Palestinian Authority back in charge of the Gaza so that a two-state solution can be seriously considered?
Well, and so first of all, yeah, if you'd like to respond to that.
Thanks for your great question, Professor. We must do something. We never can say it's too late because the situation is here. So we have to take care of it somehow. And it's not just Israeli mission. Looks like the Iranian issue, like the Palestinian issue, as well as the Hamas in Gaza, become more and more worldwide issue, because if there is no solution to the Palestinian issue without Hamas, it's altogether one solution. So we have to concentrate on diplomatic efforts, worldwide public opinion, to convince the whole world that Hamas and Hezbollah, by the way, the same, are terror organizations. And unfortunately, looks like we will need at least one more operation in the Gaza Strip. But this time, I hope it will be with clear targets from the government issue to change the situation in the Gaza Strip.
Well, but isn't there some evidence today that if there were an open and free election, obviously there's never been an open and free election, but if there were an open and free election in the Gaza, Hamas would still win, notwithstanding the fact that it has been starving its population and denying them medical care and exposing their civilians to extreme danger. Not only would they win in the Gaza, but there's some suggestion that they might even win in the West Bank. So how does a military solution end the problem when, if it's true, a large percentage of Palestinians still support Hamas over the Palestinian Authority?
Professor, do you think that, as many people are calling for, a return to targeted killings of senior Hamas members and other such individuals, would you support such a policy, and what would be the legal implications of that?
Well, targeted killing of combatants is entirely lawful. Even the Supreme Court of Israel, which has been very protective of the rights of civilians, has rendered a decision, the last decision rendered by President Aaron Barak, authorizing the use of targeted killings against combatants. Now, he defined combatants relatively narrowly, but they would include, of course, the leaders of the military wing of Hamas. I don't see that as a complete solution because military leaders are replaced by other military leaders. But I do think that I agree with the general that an overall resolution is better than every 2 years Israel having to engage in activities which diminish its impact on the world community and its respect by the world community. And so I do think that a movement toward a more overall solution is a good one, provided it's consistent with the rule of law.
Okay, as one who started the targeting killing in 1992 and 3 by special forces, and then I renewed when I was the commander of the Gaza Strip, and I renewed it when I was the commander of the Southern Command from airstrike. So obviously I'm in favor of it. I agree with the professor. He mentioned a very important point. It's part of a solution. It couldn't be just that. It should be a part of a solution. And I think it's a part of self-defense. If you know that targeting killing of clocking bombs, a terrorist leader who, in my eyes, is a clogging bombs, killing him, it means you are avoiding the next 2 or 3 terror operations against Israel.
Well, now, Dr. Samiha, I'd like to maybe move kind of to a different topic in Gaza. You've also shared your concerns about how the world views this conflict, the international community, and I understand that you actually even have a question for the professor, so if you'd like to direct that.
Yeah, dear professor, how we Israelis, Jewish, so clever, couldn't convince the whole world, mostly the Western, all the Western world even, I'm not talking about the others, but the Western world, Europe, that for God's sake, Hamas and Hezbollah are terror organizations. Why the hell you are blaming all the world? You're blaming Israel regarding the situation, the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, and you can't see so clear that the Hamas is the reason of the situation. How all of us couldn't convince the world in such simple point? What's going on?
Because a picture is worth 10,000 words, and Israelis and Jews are good at words. We make the most logical arguments, and then they show the picture of a mother carrying her dead baby, and that diminishes the impact of words. Hamas has figured this out. Hezbollah has figured it out. Hezbollah has put over 100,000 rockets in civilian areas, knowing that if Israel attacked those rockets, it would inevitably kill many civilians, and the world would react. The same thing is true with Hamas, both with its effort to lynch Israeli children by crossing the fence. And remember, they were given Google Maps to how to get to Israeli kibbutzim and other places where children are. But the world sees the picture of the dead civilian, and it doesn't imagine what the picture of the dead Israeli civilian would look like if these lynch mobs manage to get through the fence and attack civilian areas that are so close to the border. So
yes, but
it's very, very difficult to respond to pictures that are designed by Hamas to create this dead baby strategy with intelligent words. But look, as I've said over and over again, Israel should never do anything in order to look good. It should do things because they are good, because they're the right things, because they're protecting their own civilians. They have to prefer their own civilian lives over the lives of Hamas, and they should continue to do that, even if they don't look good. Let them leave it to us in the public area to defend them as best we can. It won't be completely successful, but Israel should not stop doing the right thing because the world views it in the wrong way.
So, I agree with you, but let's divide it to two levels. One is the public opinion, which I totally agree with you that the picture worth 1,000 words. By the way, also to our side, to show a picture of a kindergarten yesterday, which was hit by mortar. Just consider there were 30 kids, 4 years old kids who could have been killed from this mortar. But let's divide it to two levels. The public opinion, those guys who see the pictures, and where are the leaders of those countries who are not seeing just pictures? They can see the intelligence from our side. They can see the information. Like Trump is he become the most cleverest one who is not following the pictures. Looks like he is following the truth, as you said. He is following the facts.
And our ambassador to the UN has done the same thing. But
great.
We get close allies like Trudeau in Canada, who absolutely foolishly seem to blame this on Israel. And indeed, he questioned whether Israel can conduct independent investigations of soldiers who may have violated the rules of engagement. And he called for an international investigation against Israel and only Israel. He hasn't called for international investigations of other countries that have engaged in self-defense. And he's an ally. And people like Trudeau and others must be persuaded that if he were in that situation, he would be doing exactly the same thing, probably with more civilian casualties. But that has to be done persuasively to the leaders. For the most part, I think behind the scenes, many of the leaders understand Israel's position. But when they make public statements, they tend to be willing to put the blame more on Israel than Hamas or Hezbollah, because Hezbollah and Hamas are seen as David and Israel is seen as a Goliath. And for years, Israel was David, and all the Arab countries surrounding it were Goliath. And it's that perception that has to be changed.
But you know, I've been asked once about a simple picture with a Merkava Mark IV tank with an Israeli commander and a 6-year-old boy in Gaza holding a stone. And I've been asked about this picture. I said, listen, guys, 2,000 years, we were the kid with the stone. Now we are on the tank. Asking me today, I prefer to be on the tank with all the pain of the picture.
And of course, Israel uses its tanks so morally. It is still true that there's no army in the world that is more moral or more concerned. I have challenged opponents of Israel to name a single country in the history of the world faced with threats comparable to those faced by Israel that has ever had a better record of human rights, higher compliance with the rule of law, or more concern with enemy civilians. And no one has ever named a country that is better than Israel in that respect. Yet Israel is the one that gets most of the criticism around the world, not only at the United Nations, not only in left-wing academic circles, but by people like Trudeau and other European leaders. And that is something that has to be dealt with effectively.
Great point, sir.
So I'd like to actually now take the conversation north. Russian President Putin, in response to Israel's zero-tolerance policy with Iranian encroachment in Syria, has now decreed that he is against any presence in southern Syria that isn't Syrian. Is this permission for Israeli airstrikes in a sense, for previous and future airstrikes?
I understood that somewhat differently. I understood that as an attempt by the Russians to try to get all parties, the Iranians, the Israelis, and the Russians, to disengage. I think if Israel were to take to the skies and start to attack without provocation, unlike what it did a few weeks ago when it attacked all the Iranian missile launchers after Iran launched missiles at Israel. But I think that the Russian innovation is an attempt to try to get all parties, Israel, Iran, and Russia, out of Syria. It will be difficult to do because Iran is well entrenched there with advisors, and Russia, of course, overflies Syria. But I think this is something that we have to remain to see what Russia meant and how Iran responds.
I spent in Tehran 3 months in 1978, and I know a little bit about their policy, and I'm blaming ourselves that during the last 10 years we are focusing by ourselves and calling the world to take care of the nuclear weapon of Iran. Meantime, the conventional weapon of Iran is here, is in Syria, is in Lebanon, and Iran
a very real
is,
threat.
Yeah, it's a real threat which could happen every day, while the nuclear weapon is somewhere on the shelf. If they will use it, who knows? But the conventional weapons, the 400-kilometer missiles, which can cover most of Europe, or 1,000-kilometer missiles can cover all Israel and part of Europe.
More, yeah.
Where are we there?
Well,
you know, we are taking care of the meat, and we forgot the milk of.
Well, and I have a suggestion. I have believed that Israel should, on its own, seek a declaratory judgment from the International Criminal Court. Tell them the following situation. There are now 100,000 or more missiles aimed at Israeli civilian targets. They are enmeshed in civilian areas. What does international law allow Israel to do? It certainly doesn't require it to absorb any rocket fire from Hezbollah in Lebanon at all. And Israel has warned Hezbollah that if it allows any rockets to be fired from within civilian areas, Israel will have to respond by destroying those rockets, even if it entails civilian casualties. And I would ask the International Criminal Court for an advisory opinion as to what it is permitted to do and what every country in the world is permitted to do if rockets are aimed at it and human shields are being used to protect the rockets. At this point, I think they would have no choice but to respond in the way that the Israeli Supreme Court has responded, and that is permitting attacks on the rockets, knowing that there'll be some civilian casualties, after warning the civilians by knocks on the roof, by telephone calls, by leaflets. But in the end, any government has the right to destroy missiles aimed at it, even if those missiles are in civilian areas, and even if the end result is civilian casualties. Every one of those civilian deaths is attributable to Hezbollah and not to Israel if they put their rockets in civilian areas.
I just want to interject kind of. I understand, Dr. Samiha, that you've actually also written an autobiographical book detailing leadership in the moment of truth, and that's detailing a lot of the things that you've actually done throughout your career. And so, you know, what insights maybe can you share with us from the book that have anything to do?
I can't wait to read that book. I'm looking forward to reading the book. It sounds like
I'll do my best, Professor, to send you a printed book. And meanwhile, you can find it on Amazon.books under my name. But I'll do my best to send you a printed copy. I promise. I want to continue with the great point that the professor mentioned before. Dear Professor, according to the international law, do we allow to even not just respond to those missiles if they will be shot at first against Israel or any other place? Do we allow to make even a preventive attack while we know that in the next 48 hours they are going to use those missiles? Are we allow, according to the international law, as a self-defense step to start and do it? Because
it's a great question.
Yeah, from a military point of view, if I'll do it in a preventive step, my success is close to 100%. Then when he already started?
Sure. So, and international law distinguishes between preemptive and preventive attacks. Let me explain. A preemptive attack is one like what Israel did in 1967, when it seems like an attack is imminent. Imminence is not clearly defined, but within hours or days, then Israel is allowed to engage in a preemptive attack to increase its military advantage, as it did in 67 when it destroyed the Egyptian and Syrian air forces on the ground. Preventive is a little bit more difficult. Preventive is what Israel might, God forbid, have to do if Iran begins to develop nuclear weapons, or what Israel might have to do in Lebanon. And the law on preventive attack is unclear. The law says that the Security Council should make those decisions, but we know the Security Council, because of the Russian and Chinese veto, can never make decisions favorable to Israel. And of course, international law, Israel is not signatory to much of international law, and Israel is excluded, for example, from serving on the International Court of Justice and other international forum. So Israel's definition of international law must be made by its own Supreme Court and its own judicial institutions, rather than by the International Court of Justice. Israel is also not a member of the International Criminal Court, so it's not bound by the Treaty of Rome, to which it's not a signatory. Again, Israel should do the right thing, and if it becomes necessary to engage in preventive, as distinguished from preemptive actions, Israel should do that if it's the right thing to do, if it's the moral thing to do, if it's the correct thing to do, without necessarily focusing on the technicalities of international law, particularly international law, which is not binding on Israel.
All right, well, unfortunately with that, that is all the time that we have today. Thank you for your time, Professor Dershowitz. I'd like to again.
What a great conversation, General. What a brilliant man you are.
Thank you.
And I'm so looking forward to reading your book.
Thank you very much, sir. It was really great pleasure to hear your answers and great questions.
All right, well, and thank you again, Major General in the Reserves, Dr. Samiha. Thank you so much for coming in. Now, if you would like Professor Dershowitz to answer your questions, go to ILTV or our Facebook page and submit them. We'll see you next week.